3 days after we buried my husband, the casserole dishes were still coming. They lined the counter in my kitchen on East Jones Street, glass and ceramic, and one aluminum pan with a name written on masking tape so it would find its way home. And the whole house smelled like other people's cooking. Women from the church came in twos, the way they always do, and they patted my hand and moved their mouths carefully at me, and I nodded and thanked them, and by the afternoon, my face hurt from holding a shape that looked like gratitude. I have been deaf since I was 19 years old. Meningitis took my hearing over the course of one long week in a hospital in Macon, and I have spent 49 years learning that the world does not go quiet when your ears do. It only gets harder to prove that you are still in the room. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, had appointed herself the manager of the visitors. She stood beside me with her hand on my back like I might tip over. And every time someone spoke to me, she stepped in front of them and said it again, louder, slower, with her mouth stretched into shapes no human mouth makes naturally. She says she's sorry for your loss, Harold. She's sorry about Harold. I had already understood the woman the first time. I had read it off her lips as clean as print. But you learn not to correct people at a funeral, so I let it happen. And I let it happen again. And around 5 o'clock, I went to the sink to wash the coffee cups just to have my hands doing something honest. The window over that sink faces the side yard, and by evening in November it goes black and turns into a mirror. That is how I saw them. Vanessa and my son Daniel, standing in the doorway to the dining room behind me, close together, her hand on his forearm. She thought my back was to her. She thought that a woman at a sink with running water is a woman who cannot know anything. I watched her mouth in the glass. She can't stay here alone, Daniel. Look at her. She's a helpless deaf widow now. Somebody has to make the decisions for her, and it might as well be us before she does something stupid with the property. Daniel did not say no. That is the part I want you to understand, because the rest of this story sits on top of it. My son did not say no. He looked at the floor, and he rubbed the back of his neck the way he has since he was 6 years old and got caught in a lie. And then he nodded, one small nod, and the two of them walked out toward the porch. I stood there with a coffee cup in my hand and the water running over my wrist until it went cold. If stories like this one are the kind you look for, real people, ordinary kitchens, the things that get said when somebody thinks you can't hear them, go on and leave a like and subscribe. There are more of them here, and I would rather tell them to people who understand why they matter. My name is Margaret Bell. My husband was Harold Bell, and for 34 years he ran Bell Lumber and Supply out of a warehouse on the west side of Savannah. And for 34 years I kept every book, every ledger, every payroll and tax filing that business ever produced. I did it at the desk in our front room because Harold liked me close, and I did it in my own handwriting, and there is not a single dollar that moved through that company between 1979 and 2013 that did not pass under my pen first. Nobody outside that house ever knew. Harold knew. Harold used to say I was the only reason the doors stayed open, and he said it in front of people, and people would smile at him the way you smile at a man being sweet to his wife. We were married 41 years. We had the house on East Jones that his grandmother left him, and the warehouse, and the 4 acres out toward Thunderbolt that he bought in 1991 and never did anything with. We had one son, and on a Tuesday in November, Harold went out to get the mail and did not come back up the walk, and a neighbor found him sitting down on the bottom step like a man who had decided to rest. The reading of the will was set for the following Thursday, in an office on Bull Street, with a lawyer named Arthur Pike, whom I had met exactly twice. Vanessa had already started measuring my house with her eyes, and I had 41 years of knowing exactly who my husband was, and 1 week to find out whether he had known this was coming. Vanessa came back the next morning at 8 o'clock with a leather folder under her arm. I was at the table with my coffee and the newspaper I had not read a word of, and I saw the shadow move across the front glass before the door opened, because she had a key. Harold gave them a key 4 years ago when we went to Charleston for a weekend and somebody needed to feed the cat. Nobody had ever asked for it back. She came in the way people come into a place they are already thinking of as theirs, setting her purse on the counter and looking at the casserole dishes with a small, tight expression before she started stacking them in the sink. Then she sat down across from me, opened the folder, and turned it around so I could see. She had printed things out, brochures, the glossy kind, with photographs of white-haired women laughing in a sunroom. Magnolia Terrace in Pooler, assisted living and memory care. On top of the brochures was a single sheet with a line at the bottom for a signature, and she had already put a little yellow arrow sticker beside it. There is a notepad we keep in the drawer by the stove. It has been there for 30 years, and everyone who has ever spent an evening in my house knows where it is. Vanessa took it out, and she wrote in block capitals, the letters an inch high, pressing hard enough to go through 2 pages. We are just looking, not deciding, just looking. Then she watched my face while I read it, the way you watch a child sound out a word. I want to be fair about something here, because I have had a long time to think it over, and I would rather tell this straight than tell it satisfying. Vanessa was not a monster. She had been married to my son for 9 years. She had 2 little girls I loved without reservation, and she had sat with me in the hospital hallway the night my sister died and never once looked at her phone. She was a woman who had decided that being useful and being in charge were the same thing, and once she decided a thing about you, the deciding was over. What she had decided about me was that Harold had been my translator, my keeper, and my brain, and that with him gone there was nothing left in this house but an old woman and some valuable real estate. I picked up a pen and wrote back on the same pad, in my regular handwriting, small and even. I am not moving. Please put those away. She read it. She smiled at me with her whole face, patient and warm, and she reached over and patted my hand twice, and she left the brochures right where they were. I have been underestimated for 49 years, so I know the difference between being disagreed with and being humored. Disagreement means you were heard. What Vanessa did to me that morning was something else, and I felt it in my chest like a stone going down. In 1979, I walked into Bell Lumber and Supply on Louisville Road because I had seen a card in the window of the drugstore that said "Office Help Wanted," and I was 24 years old and had been turned down 11 times that spring. Harold's father, Emmett Bell, was behind the counter. I remember him perfectly. He was a big man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cigarette he never smoked all the way down. And when I told him I was deaf, I said it plainly, the way I had learned to, because saying it late always went worse than saying it first. He took the glasses off and folded them and said something to me with his hand over his mouth. He did it on purpose. He wanted to see what I would do. I said, "Sir, I can't read your lips through your hand." He laughed at that, but it was not a kind laugh, and he told me the office ran on the telephone and there was no place here for a girl who could not answer it. He said it slowly and loudly, and then he went back to his invoices as though I had already left the building. I was still standing there when a young man came out of the back with sawdust on his forearms. That was Harold. He was 28, and he had a pencil behind his ear, and he looked at his father and then he looked at me, and he did not do the thing that people do, which is put on the soft face and go gentle at you. He walked over to the counter, turned the big green ledger around, opened it to the page his father had been working on, and set the pencil down on top of it. Then he pointed at the page and raised his eyebrows. There were 4 columns on that sheet, and 3 of them were wrong. Somebody had entered a delivery twice and carried the error forward for 6 days. I found it in under a minute, because numbers were the one part of the world that never went quiet on me, and I put my finger on the line and looked up. Harold read my face and started laughing, and his father came over to see what the laughing was about, and by noon, I had the job. That night, when I left, Harold walked me out to the sidewalk and handed me a piece of paper torn off a delivery receipt. He had written on the back of it, "You're wasted on the telephone anyway. See you Monday. HB." That is the first one. I have it still. I have all of them, close to 4,000 of them, in a cedar box in the hall closet, because from that day until the week he died, Harold Bell wrote me a note nearly every day of his life. Not love letters, most of them. Grocery lists and weather reports and complaints about the Braves. He wrote them because it was easier than making me watch his mouth from across a room, and he kept writing them long after we had our own way of talking, because by then, it was just how we were. We married in the spring of 1982, in the garden behind his mother's house on Barnard Street, and his father stood up at the reception with a glass in his hand and told everybody that his son had found the only bookkeeper in Georgia who could not be gossiped at. Emmett meant it as a compliment by then. He had come around. It took him about 11 months. 41 years later, a woman I did not raise sat at my kitchen table and wrote to me in letters an inch high. Vanessa gathered her purse around 11. At the door, she stopped, took out her phone, typed something, and held the screen up so I could read it. And this one she had thought about, because it came out smoother than her handwriting. Daniel talked to Mr. Pike's office yesterday, just to get everything organized before Thursday. Don't worry about a thing. We've got it handled. Then she was gone down the front steps, and I stood in my own hallway with my hand still on the door, doing the arithmetic on a sentence. Daniel had gone to my husband's lawyer before the reading. Without telling me, I texted my son that night and asked him to come by. He wrote back within a minute, the way he always does, and said Sunday after church, and put a heart at the end of it, and I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time looking at that heart. Daniel is 38. He has Harold's hands and my mother's chin, and he learned to sign before he learned to read because I taught him at the kitchen table with flashcards I made out of index cards. He was a good boy. I need to say that plainly because what comes later is easier to swallow if you think he was rotten from the start, and he was not. He was a boy who used to run into the house from the bus and sign home with both hands before he even got his backpack off, so I would know from the hallway that he was in the house. Somewhere along the way, he stopped signing. It happened so slowly I could not tell you the year. By the time he was in high school, he was mumbling at me with his face turned toward the refrigerator, and by the time he was married, he had a wife who would say it again for him, louder. They came Sunday with the girls. Lily is 7 and Josie is 4, and Lily is the one who has decided that being my interpreter is her personal job. She stands in front of me with her hands on my knees and repeats everything anybody says with her whole body, adding parts, editing out anything she considers boring. That afternoon, she told me the sermon had been about a fisherman and that it went on for 100 hours. Josie put a dinosaur in my coffee. For about 40 minutes, it was the best time I had had since Harold sat down on those steps. The girls were on the rug. The light was coming in low and yellow through the front window, and I could almost forget the leather folder that was still sitting on my counter under a dish towel where I had shoved it. If you have a house like that in your memory, one you can still walk through with your eyes closed, you already know what I am talking about. Subscribe if you want more of these. I tell them for people who understand what a room like that is worth. Then Vanessa took the girls out to the porch, and it was just Daniel and me in the front room, and I took the notepad out and wrote my question and slid it across. Why did you go to Arthur Pike? He read it, and he did the thing with the back of his neck. He talked at me for a while, and I got most of it. Just paperwork. Just wanted to have everything organized so Thursday would be easy on me. Then he said something I did not catch, and I raised my hand and he stopped, and he wrote the rest. Dad and I talked about the property before he passed. He wanted things kept in the family. That's all I'm doing, Mama. I read that sentence 4 times, Harold and I had been married 41 years. In 41 years, that man never made a single decision about that house, that warehouse, or that land without sitting down at the desk in the front room and going through it with me first. Not one. When we refinanced in 1998, he wrote out the whole thing in longhand on a legal pad so I could follow it line by line. He did not talk about the property with anyone before he talked about it with me. So either my son was telling me the truth, and my husband had been keeping something from me at the end of his life, or my son was lying to my face in my own front room. I looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, and he did not look away, and I understood then that he had rehearsed this. In the spring of 1987, Bell Lumber and Supply came within about 6 weeks of closing its doors. Emmett had a stroke in February and never fully came back. Harold took over the whole operation overnight, and he was good with lumber and good with people and hopeless with paper. And by April, there were bills going out that did not match the bills coming in. I was doing the books at night by then, because Daniel was 2, and I had him on my hip most of the day. I found it on a Tuesday. There was a supplier out of Statesboro that had been billing us for full loads and delivering short by 8 or 10%. And they had been doing it since before Emmett got sick. It was a small enough shave that nobody eyeballing a delivery would ever catch it. But it was in the numbers, and the numbers were mine, and I had been looking at that account for 3 weeks with the feeling you get when a picture on the wall is a 1/4 inch crooked. I sat at that desk until 2 in the morning and rebuilt 18 months of that account by hand, load by load, and I put the whole thing in a folder and set it on Harold's plate at breakfast. He read it standing up. Then he sat down without saying anything and read it again. Then he got in the truck and drove to Statesboro, and I do not know exactly what was said in that office, but we were paid back in full over the following year, and that money is the only reason the doors stayed open. That is also the money that bought the 4 acres out toward Thunderbolt in 1991. Harold put it in my hands in an envelope and told me to decide what to do with it. And I said, land, because land does not care whether you can hear. He wanted to put my name on the business that year. Emmett was still alive, still sharp enough to have opinions and not sharp enough to have new ones, and he told Harold that a company with a woman's name on the license was a company that looked like it was in trouble. Harold argued with his father about it twice that I know of. Then he came home and wrote me a note and left it on the ledger. I'll fix it. Give me time. You built this, and everybody's going to know it. H.B. Emmett died in 1994. I never did see my name on that license, and after a while I stopped asking, because the work was the same either way, and I was not doing it for a piece of paper. I have thought about that a great deal since. Sunday evening, after they left, I went into the front room and opened the bottom drawer of Harold's desk, where the deed to the house and the deed to the warehouse and the deed to the Thunderbolt property had lived in 3 separate manila folders since before my son was born. There were 2 folders in that drawer. I took everything out and put it on the floor and went through the whole desk twice, drawer by drawer. And then I sat down on the rug in the dark with my back against the front of that desk, 68 years old, and made myself think it through instead of feeling it. The Thunderbolt folder was gone. Monday morning, I put on the gray dress I wear to funerals and to banks, and I drove myself downtown. I want to be clear that I have driven myself everywhere since 1976. There is a whole category of people who find that surprising, and I have stopped explaining it. The records office in the Chatham County Courthouse is on the ground floor, and the woman at the counter that morning was named Denise, and she is the reason I still speak well of that building. When I told her I was deaf and asked her to write things down, she did not raise her voice or slow her mouth. She turned her monitor around so I could see it, pulled a legal pad toward herself, and we did the whole thing in about 20 minutes with her typing and me pointing. I asked for everything recorded on the Thunderbolt parcel. The deed was there, in Harold's name, unchanged since 1991. Nothing had been sold. Nothing had been transferred. I felt my shoulders come down about an inch. Then Denise scrolled to a column I did not know existed and typed on the pad. Someone requested a certified copy of this deed on September 19th. Harold died on the 7th of November. September 19th was 7 weeks before that, and my husband had been alive and well and complaining about the Braves on September 19th, and he had not mentioned the Thunderbolt property to me since sometime in the spring. I asked whether it said who requested it. She turned the monitor. It did not give a name, only a code for a walk-in request paid in cash. I sat in my car in the parking garage afterward and did something I should have done days earlier, which is search the address on my phone. It took 4 minutes. 4 acres, marsh frontage, Thunderbolt, listed with a broker on Whitaker Street. Coming soon. Inquiries welcome. The photographs had been taken in daylight from the road, sometime when the grass was still green. We sold the company in 2013 to a regional outfit out of Macon. Harold was 62 and his back was finished, and the offer was fair, and we sat at that desk in the front room for 3 nights running with a legal pad between us, before we said yes. The closing was in a conference room with a long table. I sat next to Harold with my hands folded, and the buyer's attorney made his little speech at the end, the way they do, and he said it had been a pleasure to review the cleanest set of books he had seen in 30 years of practice, and that Mr. Bell should be proud of what he had built. Harold did not smile and let it pass. He put his hand flat on the table and said, in a voice I did not need to hear to feel, that he had not made a single entry in those books in 34 years, that his wife had made all of them, that she had also caught the theft in 1987 that kept the company alive, and that if anybody at that table wanted to thank somebody, they could turn their chair. Then he waited. He actually waited, and the room got long and uncomfortable, and one by one those men turned and thanked me. I have been in a great many rooms where I was the only one who could not hear. That is the only one where I was the only one being heard. Harold kept the warehouse building out of the sale and leased it, and that lease check came every month, and it was more than enough for the 2 of us. Daniel asked to borrow against it twice, once in 2016 for a contracting business that lasted 19 months, and once in 2021 for reasons that were never fully explained to me. Harold said no both times, and he said it kindly. And after the second one, he came into the kitchen and stood there for a while and finally wrote on the pad, "He doesn't want to build anything. He wants to be finished building it." That is the hardest sentence anyone ever wrote about my son, and his own father wrote it. Wednesday afternoon they came back, and they brought a third person. He was a young man in a golf shirt with a stamp in a zippered case, and Vanessa introduced him with a bright face and a hand on his shoulder, and Daniel stood behind the 2 of them holding a folder against his chest like a shield. I knew what a notary was. I had used a notary perhaps 40 times in my working life. I had, in fact, notarized documents in the office of Bell Lumber and Supply for a decade with a stamp of my own, which is a thing neither of them ever bothered to learn about me. Vanessa wrote on the pad, "It's just so somebody can help you at the meeting tomorrow. It doesn't change anything. It's easier for everyone." Daniel opened his folder and set the paper on the table in front of me, and I picked it up and read it. All of it. Both pages, while the 3 of them stood there. It was a durable power of attorney, full authority over real property, financial accounts, and the sale or transfer of assets. Daniel's name on the line. Effective immediately. I set it down and squared the edges with my fingers, because my hands wanted something to do, and I looked up at my son. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the window over the sink. I took the pad and I wrote one sentence, and I turned it around so all 3 of them could read it at the same time. I have kept a set of books for 34 years, and I have not made an error yet. Get out of my kitchen. The notary left first. He was gone inside of a minute, and I do not blame him. Vanessa's face went through several things before it settled, and the last one was not warm at all. She wrote nothing. She said something to Daniel with her back half turned, and I only got a piece of it off the side of her mouth. The part where she said tomorrow, and the part where she said it won't matter anyway. Then the door, and their car, and my house went still. I stood in that kitchen until the light changed. Then I went to the hall closet and took down the cedar box. Nearly 4,000 notes, in no order at all, 30 and 40 years of grocery lists and weather and Harold Bell's opinion of a bullpen. I went through them from the top because the top is the most recent, and I was looking for, I did not know what. And about 11 notes down, I found one on a piece of paper torn off a delivery receipt, which was what he always reached for when he was in the truck. I remembered it. He had handed it to me at the kitchen counter, and I had read it and said something about supper. And I had put it in the box the way I put all of them in the box, because after 4 decades, you stop treating them like events. Went and saw Arthur today. Everything's where it needs to be. Don't let anybody hurry you, Maggie. You'll know what to do. HB. I turned it over and looked at the date printed on the receipt. September 19th. Thursday, I was awake at 4. I made coffee I did not drink, and I sat at the kitchen table in the dark with that receipt in front of me. And around 5, I stopped reading it and started thinking about what my husband actually meant. Everything's where it needs to be. Don't let anybody hurry you. You'll know what to do. Harold was not a mysterious man. He was a man who said things plainly, and if he wrote a sentence like that, it was because he could not write the whole thing down. At 7, I called a woman named Ruth Ann Pierce, who has interpreted for me at doctors' offices and 1 funeral and a closing on a truck. And I asked her to meet me on Bull Street at 10. She said she would be there at 9:45. She was there at 9:30. I did not tell my son I was bringing her. Arthur Pike's office is on the 2nd floor of one of those old buildings with a staircase that turns twice, and the conference room has a window that looks straight into the crown of a live oak, so the whole room is green. There were 5 chairs. Vanessa had already put her purse on one of them. When Ruth Ann and I came in together, Vanessa stood up halfway and then sat back down, and I watched her work it out. She had come prepared to translate me, to sit beside me and lean over and tell me what was happening in a loud voice in front of the lawyer, so that everyone in the room would understand the arrangement. Instead, I sat down at the head of the table with a certified interpreter at my shoulder, and I took out my own legal pad and my own pen and set them square in front of me, and I said good morning to Mr. Pike and asked him to begin whenever he was ready. Daniel would not look at me. He had a manila folder in front of him and he kept squaring it with his thumbs. Arthur Pike is 74 and has the driest face in Georgia. He put on his glasses, and he thanked us for coming, and he said that before he began, he wanted the record to reflect that Mrs. Bell had arranged her own interpreter, and that all parties were present at her invitation. Then he read. The first parts were small and slow. Harold struck to a man named Curtis who had worked the yard with him for 20 years. His tools to Daniel, all of them, including the level his father had bought in 1961, and I saw my son's jaw move at that. 2 savings bonds each to Lily and Josie, the contents of the house to me. Vanessa was writing on her phone with her thumbs. She did not look up once during the small things. Then Pike turned a page and said that he would now read the disposition of real property. The house at East Jones Street. To my wife, Margaret Ann Bell, in fee simple, absolutely. The warehouse building on Louisville Road, together with the lease and all income from it. To my wife, Margaret Ann Bell, in fee simple, absolutely. Vanessa's head came up. Pike kept going in the same flat voice. The 4 acres at Thunderbolt, he said, were not part of the residuary estate, because on the 19th of September, the decedent had conveyed that parcel into a trust. Daniel said something. I got the shape of it off his mouth, and Ruth Ann gave it to me at the same moment. What trust? The Bell Grandchildren's Trust, Pike said. established September 19th, for the benefit of Lillian Bell and Josephine Bell, to be held until each reaches the age of 25. Sole trustee, with full and exclusive authority over the property, its management, and any sale or transfer, Margaret Ann Bell. No successor trustee to be appointed during her lifetime except by her own written designation. The room was very quiet. I know it was, because I could see it. Vanessa put her hand on Daniel's arm and started to talk, fast, to Pike. And Pike lifted one finger about an inch off the table and she stopped. And he said there was more and that he would prefer to read it as written. He turned the page. He said the decedent had executed a codicil on the same date, September 19th, and that he had drafted it at Harold's instruction and, in Harold's own words, as nearly as the law would allow. Then he read my husband's sentences out loud in a room with my son in it. That his wife had managed the finances of his household and his business for 34 years without a single error. That she was of sound mind and full capacity, and that a physician's evaluation to that effect, dated the 18th of September, was attached as an exhibit and filed with the original instrument. That he directed no guardianship or conservatorship of any kind be sought over her person or her property. That he requested the court disregard, as contrary to his express intent, any petition brought by any family member alleging that her deafness constituted incapacity, and that any beneficiary under the will who challenged the capacity of Margaret Ann Bell, or contested any provision of the instrument, would forfeit every interest given to them by it, entirely, and take nothing. Ruth Ann's hands were moving. I was watching her hands, and I was also watching my son's face, and I do not know how I managed both, but I did, because I have spent my whole life managing both. Daniel had gone gray, not angry, gray, the way he looked at 9 years old when the vet came out to the waiting room about the dog. Vanessa was still talking. She was talking to Pike, and then to Daniel, and then to the middle of the table, and I caught fragments. This is ridiculous. He wasn't in his right mind. We were only trying to. And Pike sat with his hands folded and waited her out, the way a man waits out weather. When she stopped, he said that Mr. Bell had come to this office twice in September, alone, and that on the second visit he had been asked directly whether he wished to reconsider, and that his answer had been recorded and witnessed. Then Pike looked at me, and only at me, for the first time all morning. He said there was one more item, and that it was not a legal instrument and formed no part of the estate. He reached into his case and took out a plain white envelope, sealed with my name across the front in handwriting I had been reading since 1979. He said Harold had left instructions that it was to be given to me at the conclusion of the reading, and to no one else, and that he was not to know what it said. He slid it down the length of that table, past my son, past my daughter-in-law, and stopped it under my hand. I did not open it in that room. I put the envelope in my handbag, and I thanked Arthur Pike. And I asked him for a copy of the codicil for my own records, because 34 years of bookkeeping teaches you never to leave a room holding somebody else's copy of anything. Daniel caught up with me on the staircase, at the second turn, where the light comes through the window on the landing. He stood 2 steps below me so his face was level with mine, and he opened his mouth and nothing came out of it. And then he did something I had not seen him do in more than 20 years. He brought both hands up and made the sign for home. That was all. He could not manage anything else, and I did not help him. He was crying the way grown men cry, badly and with no idea what to do with his face, and my chest hurt so much I could hardly stand it, and I still did not take it back. I took out my pad and wrote one line and put it in his hand. You knew where I was the whole time. Come back when you can look at me. Then I went down the rest of the stairs and out into Bull Street. There is a bench in Chippewa Square under the oaks. I sat down and opened my husband's last letter with my thumb, and the paper was the good kind, which meant he had thought about it. He wrote that in September he had driven out to Thunderbolt to look at the water and found a man with a measuring wheel walking his property line, and that the man had a card in his pocket with our son's name on it. He had sat in the truck for an hour and had not told me because he did not want me carrying it while he decided what to do. He was not angry at Daniel so much as sick over him, and he wrote that a father cannot fix a grown man, but a husband can make sure the woman he leaves behind is never in a room where somebody else holds the pen. At the bottom, in that same square handwriting from the delivery receipts, I told you in '94 I'd fix it and give me time. It took me 29 years and I'm sorry it took a will to do it. You built everything we had, Maggie. Now it's yours on paper too, and nobody gets to say different. Don't let the house get quiet. HB. I sat there a good while. The oaks were dropping and a young man went by with a dog, and nobody in that square knew a thing had happened to me at all. Then I drove home to East Jones Street, took the leather folder out from under the dish towel where it had been sitting all week, and put it in the bin by the side door. I washed the last of the casserole dishes and set them on the counter with their masking tape names so the churchwomen could come get them. That evening, I did the thing I had not done since the 7th of November. I sat down at the desk in the front room, opened a drawer, and took out a pen. Lily comes on Saturdays now. She is learning to sign properly, with her whole hands instead of her whole body, and she is teaching Josie badly. There is more I could tell you about what happened to that trust, and to my son, in the year after. But that is a different evening, and I have found that some stories need to be set down before the next one gets picked up.